A Filipino bride's dream life in Japan turns into a nightmare. The truth behind her death was hidden in plain sight. This is Althea's story. The vibrant, rhythmic clacking of bamboo poles against the floor was the heartbeat of the celebration. I was at a Filipino community hall in Yokohama, surrounded by the irresistible aroma of adobo and pancit. My friend Corazon, her face glowing with happiness, was celebrating her niece's wedding. We were laughing, our plates piled high with food, caught in the joyful chaos of a traditional tinikling dance. The dancers weaved expertly between the swinging poles, their movements a perfect metaphor for navigating life's challenges with grace. It was a bubble of pure, unadulterated joy, a piece of home transplanted onto Japanese soil. Then, Corazon's phone vibrated insistently on the table. Her smile melted away as she listened, replaced by a furrow in her brow and a grin set to her jaw. She ended the call and turned to me, the festive noise seeming to fade into a distant hum. "There's a problem," she said, her voice low and urgent. "A Filipino girl from a nearby town. She's dead. They need women to wash the body. Islamic rite. There's no one else." The request hung in the air, a stark, chilling contrast to the laughter around us. The transition was jarring. One moment I was clapping along to a joyful dance, and the next I was silently following Corazon to her car, the upbeat music swallowed by the solemn quiet of the parking lot. The drive was a silent voyage from one world to another. We left the colorful decorations and lively music behind, arriving at a stark, utilitarian municipal building that housed the city's morgue. The automatic doors hissed shut behind us, sealing us in an atmosphere of antiseptic cleanliness and profound silence, a universe away from the life we had just left.
Inside the cold, brightly lit hallway, a man was waiting for us. He introduced himself as Kenji Tanaka. He was a man caught in a difficult situation, his posture slumped, his eyes darting everywhere but our faces. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes hinting at a sleepless night. In halting, formal English, he began to explain, his words sounding rehearsed, as if he had delivered them multiple times already. "She was a trainee," he started, referring to the deceased girl, Althea. "She come here on cultural trainee visa. To work, to learn." He painted a picture of a grateful young woman given an opportunity, who had then complicated her own life. "She had a Filipino boyfriend, bad man, very jealous, very violent." Kenji wrung his hands, a gesture that seemed more about his own anxiety than any genuine grief. "We told her to be careful, to stop seeing him, but she would not listen." He concluded his narrative with the final tragic act. "Last night, she did not come home. This morning, police call. They find her outside, near the house." He shook his head, a picture of resigned sadness. "The boyfriend, I think. The police, they think so too." It was a clean, simple story, a crime of passion that neatly assigned blame and absolved Pham and his household of any responsibility. Yet the delivery was hollow. The lack of specific detail, the way his gaze slid away from ours when he mentioned the boyfriend, and the overwhelming aura of fear that clinged to him suggested a much more complicated and far darker truth lurking beneath the surface of his convenient explanation. The mortuary attendant, a man whose face was professionally blank, led us to a small, starkly white room. The air was heavy with the smell of disinfectant, a scent that tried and failed to mask the deeper odor of death. A form lay on a steel table, covered by a crisp white sheet. With a silent prayer, Corazon and I moved forward. As we gently pulled back the sheet, Corazon let out a sharp, stifled gasp. Althea's face was revealed, young, perhaps in her early 20s, with features that would have been pretty in life. Now they were waxy and still, frozen in an expression that wasn't quite peace, but a silent, final surprise. As we began the sacred ritual of ghusl, the Islamic rite of washing the deceased, the official story of a single violent attack began to disintegrate under our own trembling hands. The cool water flowed over her skin, revealing a hidden history of pain. These were not just the marks of one final assault. They were a brutal timeline of suffering. The story Kenji told was a lie written in haste. The truth was written here, on Althea's body, in a language of bruises and broken bones, and it was a story of prolonged, systematic cruelty that no jealous boyfriend could ever explain. Haunted by the silent testimony of Althea's body, I found it impossible to resume life as normal. A few days later, I returned to the quiet, orderly neighborhood where the Tanakas lived. I sought out Sidi, the Indonesian woman Corazon had pointed out, who worked as a domestic helper next door. We sat in her small, immaculate room, and over cups of sweet, thick tea, the real story began to pour out. "The trainee visa?" Sidi said with a bitter laugh that held no humor. "That was a lie, they told the police. A simple story." She leaned forward, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper.
Kenji went to the Philippines last year. He met Althea in her province. He was older, Japanese. He seemed like a prince. He married her there, a proper wedding. He showed her pictures of this big house, of life in Japan. He promised her a real life, a family. The marriage certificate, CD explained, was not a document of love, but a calculated tool. It was the easiest way to bring a young, vulnerable woman into the country, a key that unlocked not a dream, but a prison. Althea had arrived not as a trainee, but as a bride, her heart full of hope, completely unaware that the title of wife was merely a disguise for the reality of indentured servitude that awaited her.
City, having witnessed the entire tragedy unfold, described Althea's arrival with poignant clarity. Althea had stepped off the plane at Narita Airport, wide-eyed, clutching her small suitcase as if it were a treasure chest. The sleek trains, the dazzling neon signs of Tokyo, the overwhelming orderliness of it all. It was everything she had dreamed of. Kenji drove her to his home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was nice, just as in the pictures. But when the door opened, the dream shattered. Yuki Tanaka was standing there, not as a welcoming relative, but as a stern overseer. "I am Mrs. Tanaka," she had said, her voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. She didn't welcome Althea. She inspected her. Then she led her not to a master bedroom, but to a small spare room at the back of the house overlooking the neatly trimmed garden. "This is where you will stay," Yuki stated. "The help stays here." Althea's suitcase, which contained all her worldly possessions and her hopes for a new beginning, was placed in the corner of that sterile room. The promise of being a wife and partner had evaporated in an instant, replaced by the grim reality of being a live-in servant, isolated and utterly at the mercy of a woman who saw her not as a person, but as a piece of property. In the following days, Althea learned the true power structure of the Tanaka household. Yuki was its absolute ruler, a woman whose control was exercised with quiet, chilling precision. She was not given to loud rages. Her tyranny was bureaucratic and cold. She provided Althea with a meticulously detailed list of chores that would have been exhausting for 3 people. Every surface was to be polished, every item in its exact place. But the most insidious form of control was the surveillance. City revealed that Yuki had installed small, discreet cameras in the main living areas. From her iPad, she could watch Althea's every move, a silent, ever-present eye ensuring total obedience. Kenji, meanwhile, became a ghost in his own home. He would leave early for work, eat his meals in silence, and retreat to a separate room in the evening. If he ever showed a flicker of kindness towards Althea, a sympathetic glance, an attempt to speak, Yuki's disapproval was immediate and palpable. Her jealousy was not romantic. It was territorial and economic. She viewed Althea as a threat to her authority, her routine, and the financial stability that her own income provided. Yuki's goal was not to win affection, but to maintain absolute control. And in that mission, she was ruthlessly effective.
City sighed deeply when I asked about the boyfriend Kenji had mentioned. "That boy? He was named Jose. He delivered vegetables to the houses in the neighborhood," she explained. "He was from Manila, just trying to make a living. The only time Althea was allowed outside alone was on Saturday mornings when Yuki made her cut the grass. For Althea, those brief moments became her only connection to the outside world. She would linger near the fence, and if Jose was making a delivery, they would exchange a few words in Tagalog. It was nothing more than a desperate grasp for a familiar sound, a friendly face. They talked about home, about their families," City said. "It was the only human kindness she received all week." Yuki, watching from a window, had seen these innocent interactions and twisted them into something sordid. In her mind, it became an affair, a narrative she used to justify her own resentment and cruelty. The violent boyfriend was a complete fabrication, a convenient scapegoat invented to mask the horrific reality of what was happening within the pristine walls of the Tanaka home. Althea's one small comfort had been perverted into the motive for her own murder. City's eyes filled with tears of guilt and frustration as she explained her own painful position. I saw her. I saw the fear in her eyes. Sometimes, through the open windows in the summer, I heard Yuki's voice, sharp like a knife. I heard Althea crying. She clutched her teacup tightly. But what could I do? My visa, it had expired 6 months ago. City was living in a state of constant, low-grade terror herself. If she went to the police, she wouldn't just risk losing her job, she faced immediate deportation. Back in her village in Indonesia, her elderly parents and young siblings relied entirely on the money she sent home. Her silence was a terrible, calculated choice, a trade-off between her conscience and her family's survival. I thought, maybe it'll get better. Maybe Kenji will help her. I thought if I caused trouble, I would be sent away, and then I would be no help to anyone. Her testimony was a damning indictment, not just of the Tanakas, but of a system that forces the most vulnerable into complicity. The very structures meant to protect people instead created a cage where victims could only watch each other suffer, powerless to intervene.
The end, as Siti described it, was both brutal and inevitable. The trigger was a moment of fleeting kindness. The previous evening, Yuki was out attending a community meeting. Kenji, perhaps feeling a rare sense of freedom, had come into the kitchen where Althea was cleaning. He saw her wincing in pain as she lifted a heavy pot. According to Siti, who saw it through her kitchen window, he had taken the pot from her and said a few quiet words. It was a small human gesture. But Yuki returned home earlier than expected and witnessed this tiny act of decency. Something in her snapped. She didn't shout immediately. Her rage was cold and controlled. She waited until Kenji had slunk away to his room. Then she advanced on Althea, accusing her of trying to seduce her husband, of being a thief and whore. The argument escalated quickly. Siti heard the sounds of the struggle, a cry, a thud, the sound of something breaking. The beating was severe. Later that night, injured, terrified, and in immense pain, Althea must have tried to flee. She made it out of the house and into the garden, but her body, already weakened by months of abuse, gave out. She collapsed in the dewy grass, where her body was discovered the next morning by Yuki herself, who then performed the theatrical distress call to the police. When the police arrived, they were met with a united front. Kenji, terrified of Yuki and the legal consequences, parroted the story of the violent Filipino boyfriend. Yuki, calm and collected, played the part of the concerned employer, lamenting the girl's poor choices. This police, faced with a language barrier, a lack of obvious evidence to the contrary, and a neat, prepackaged explanation, had little incentive to dig deeper. A migrant worker's death was a complication. A crime of passion by an absent, unnamed boyfriend was a tidy file that could be closed quickly. They took statements, asked a few perfunctory questions, and when no boyfriend immediately materialized, they seemed content to let the investigation stall. The Tanaka's version of events became the official record, effectively erasing the truth of Althea's sustained torment and painting over a murder with a bland brush of an unsolved, low-priority case. The system, designed for order, had failed to see the chaos lurking behind a respectable facade.
Althea's death leaves a chasm of unanswered questions that echo far beyond that quiet suburban street. Who bears the ultimate responsibility? Is it Kenji for his profound cowardice and willingness to sacrifice a young life to preserve his own comfort? Is it Yuki for her calculated, brutal cruelty? Or does the blame lie with a broader system, immigration policies that create an underclass of vulnerable, invisible people, and a social reluctance to look too closely into the private affairs of a household? What about the family back in the Philippines, whose desperate hopes for a better life may have clouded their judgment? Could they have seen the warning signs? There are no simple answers, only the chilling certainty that Althea's tragedy was not a singular freak event, but the predictable result of a convergence of exploitation, fear, and systemic indifference. Her death was a preventable catastrophe, a fire that multiple people saw smoldering, but that no one had the courage or the ability to extinguish. Althea's story is a stark lighthouse beam illuminating a dangerous shore. It is a warning that must be heard in villages and cities where the dream of a life abroad shines with an almost magical allure. To any family considering such a path for their daughter, sister, or friend, proceed with extreme caution. The price of a visa should never be a young woman's safety, her autonomy, or her very life. Investigate relentlessly. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Demand to speak directly with other people in the household. Be deeply suspicious of promises that seem too good to be true, because they almost always are. The world is not always a kind place, and predators often hide behind masks of respectability. Althea's voice was silenced, but we can amplify her story. Let it be a lesson that no amount of potential prosperity is worth the risk of entrusting a loved one to strangers in a foreign land, where they can become invisible, voiceless, and ultimately just another tragic headline.
Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.